Hey YouTube, I'm Q and I make stuff. Welcome to my workroom. Well, welcome to my workroom. Today we're gonna work on something together. You can follow along with the video or, work at your own pace, whatever. It's okay. We're gonna make my little friend Gnome Chompski. He's made out of fleece and little scraps of stuff. There's a free downloadable pattern in the doobly-doo. Just click the link and download it and print out the PDF file. Perhaps somebody gave you a kit from starparticipant.com, or you just stumbled upon a sewing video and you're like, making a gnome out of scraps. That sounds awesome. We're here for you. Or you got yourself a kit to make a Gnome Chompski and you are like, I don't really know how to sew. We got you covered. So the video is longer than it actually takes to make Gnome Chompski. I'm just taking my time to make sure that I'm clear, and I hope I am clear. But when it comes to really cranking out gnome on your own, it'll only take about 15 minutes from start to finish, and that's including all of the hand sewing. So follow along and we will get busy making gnomes. You can pick up a kit at starparticipant.com. It really just kind of covers the cost of shipping and production of the paper and whatnot. So you can make your own gnomes. Stick with me and we'll get through this together. So to make our friend gnome, we're gonna need a few things. We'll need the pattern that you just downloaded, a pair of craft scissors to cut that pattern out, fabric for his hat, a little scrap of stuff for his beard, stuff for his base and his body, and something fun for his nose. Fabric scissors to cut your fabric out, light thread to sew his nose on, dark thread to close up the body, some tools to turn his hat. This is a chopstick and a straw. I'll show you how to do that. A little bit of liquid stitch to hold his beard in place. You can use fabric tack if that's all you have, or Elmer's school glue if that's what you've got. And then we'll need some polyfill for his hat, and rice, popcorn, or poly pellets for the base. A few pins just to hold stuff together while we work. And if you're feeling real spicy and friendly, you can fill it with some catnip for your buddies. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, one last thing about the pattern before we get started. I've added a 1-inch scale. When you print this out, print it at 100% and then check the scale. This is just a good practice for when you're downloading any kind of a PDF pattern from the internet. Okay, I have all my pattern pieces cut out, my nose, the base, body, and hat, and I'm going to pin the body and the hat right sides together. So the little black marks on the pattern are notches, and we want to put a little snip through the edge of our pieces, and they act as markers for lining up our pattern pieces for pinning and sewing. This is important when you want all your parts to match up perfectly, and since this hat and body have a little bit of a curve to them, I added notches so that we'd get it just right. They're just a little visual indicator to help us. Line up the edges, put a pin in it. I'm going to double check this middle one. Looking good. Okay, and so we're going to go over to the sewing machine. We're going to use the edge of the presser foot as our seam guide. So just going to line up the edge of my fabric with the edge of my presser foot, drop my presser foot. I'm going to hang onto the tails of my thread so when I start sewing they don't get sucked up and make a mess. couple stitches forward, couple stitches backwards, just to lock it down. And we're just gonna sew along that edge. I'm helping my fabric a little bit, but not much. Letting the machine do the work. Back and forth, lock stitch. We want to do that at the beginning and end of every sewn seam. So here I'm matching up my seams, putting a pin in it so it looks nice and tidy when we turn it right side out. Matching up my end bits there, my corners, so it's just exactly right when we're done. I'm going to put a pin in to mark my opening, so I'm going to skip the bit between the purple pins when I sew, and that will be how we turn it right side out and stuff it. So we're going to sew from the wide end to the narrow end, because if we started at the narrow end it would probably get messy really quick. So I'm just going to help myself out here and start at the wide end. Drop my needle, hang on to my threads, put in a lock stitch. I'm going to get to this bulky part and start flattening out the bulky parts and keep going. Put in my lock stitch. Now I'm just going to pick up my presser foot and slide through to the next pin, creating my opening. Drop my presser foot, back and forth a little bit here for my lock stitch, and away we go. So right off the end here, back and forth for my lock stitch. Okay, now I'm going to pin my base and the bottom together, right sides together, using my notches to help get everything just so. This is a small little circle, so it's going to be a little tricky, but we're going to take our time with it. And here, the last notch I'm going to line up with the seam. Get it right there, lined up in the middle. You might want to put more pins in there because it is such a small little circle. So I'm just picking a spot, any spot to start. Hang onto my thread tails, drop my needle in, put in a little bit of a lock stitch. And I'm going to take my time and work my way around this little itty bitty circle. I'm helping push my fabric just a little bit using my pins as a kind of a lever to get around to the corners, or in the curve I should say. And here I've met the seam and it's a bit bulky, so I'm going to use my thread snips and just flatten out that bulk and so I can sew over it. I'm almost back to where I started. Okay, lock stitch, and we're done with this kind of sewing. So I'm going to turn my dude right side out. I'm going to take my time with the hat. It's pointy and has that little itty bitty tip. So I'm going to use a chopstick to help push it out. I don't want to push too hard. So I'm just guiding gently. I'm going to switch to the other end just to help push out the tip. I don't want to push too hard. There we have it. Set aside a little piece of stuffing for the nose. And I'm going to start stuffing the gnome with a small piece of polyfill. Too big of a piece will make it bunch up and wad it up in the end, and it'll look wrong and feel wrong. So start small, pushing it into the end. Take your time. Be patient with this. Small pieces. Okay, now we can start with bigger pieces. I'm just checking the firmness of his hat, and I'm ready to fill the base up. I made a funnel out of a piece of paper, and I'm going to stick it down in the hole. And this will help me get my filling material down into the base. I'm using poly pellets here, but you can also use rice, dried beans, popcorn kernels. I'm just going to tap it down in there. I'm going to take my time. And now I'm going to put a little bit of stuffing on top of it so the beads don't escape while I'm trying to finish my stuffing. It's kind of amazing how much stuffing can go into Gnome Chompski. So I'm done with my stuffing, and I'm just trying to get the edges of the fabric out and ready to be sewn. So we're going to use a ladder stitch. I have my needle and thread all ready to go here. So same with the machine, I want to put in a lock stitch. My first stitch is going to be I'm going to pull it through, but not very tightly, and then put another stitch right on top of it. And that creates a lock stitch so that any tension doesn't cause the thread to pop out. Take a little stitch. I'm going to go perpendicular across, take another stitch. So the ladder stitch is also called an invisible stitch. And I have a video on how to do a ladder stitch. I'll put a card up in the corner here if you need to see a better, more clear illustration of how to do the ladder stitch. We use it twice in this project. These stitches don't have to be perfect. They shouldn't be too big or too small. So now that I'm at the end of my seam, I'm going to put in my lock stitch. And now I'm going to tie my knot. So watch what I'm doing. Take the tail of my thread and wrap it around my needle 3 times and pull my needle through. I'm going to punch my needle through the other side, kind of tighten that knot down. I'm going to cut it off, and that puts the tail of the thread inside the body. Here I'm just snipping off a little bit of the extra fluff that escaped my hole as I was sewing. Just making tidy work. You could stop here if you're making a cat toy, but I think our dude needs a beard. So here's my beard piece. And I'm gonna glue this down using fabric glue. You can use white school glue if you've got it. And I'm gonna put a layer of glue over the whole surface of the beard. I want to go from edge to edge and fill it in all the way. And I'm doing this because the body of our gnome has a bit of nap to it, and I want the glue to get in there and actually stick. So it's not too thick and it's not too thin. Got a good layer of coverage. Now I want the beard to go directly opposite of the back seam, so I'm just kind of checking, using my hand, my finger as a guide, and there's my beard, pat, pat, pat. I'm gonna put a few pins in there to hold his beard down while it dries. So this glue takes about 30 minutes to dry. You can set your project down, go get a snack, go walk the dog, take a little break. Sewing through wet glue is really messy and frustrating, so I suggest you just set it aside. So now I'm going to work on the nose. On the back side, I'm going to sew a running stitch. Here I'm going to start with my lock stitch as per usual. And I'm going to use a running stitch around the very outside edge. And I'm going to sew along this little circle and kind of gather it together as I go, forming a dumpling, if you will. So these aren't particularly tiny stitches, but they're not very big stitches either, because I want to have a really nice little tidy gather. And once I've gotten all the way around, I'm going to take one more stitch so that I overlap where I started. That'll make a really nice complete little gather. So I'm pulling the thread a little bit, forming up my little dumpling. I'm going to set my needle down and I'm going to put my stuffing in my dumpling. I'm going to pull my thread gently to form the gather in my little dumpling. I'm going to pinch it with my fingers and I'm going to sew another lock stitch, and that'll hold my gathers in place. I don't have to tie a knot here. So here's my gnome. I'm gonna have to give the pins a little bit of a twist to get them out because of the glue. So I'm just twiddling them with my fingers. And I am positioning the nose. So this one, the beard is a little bit wider than the nose, but we're gonna fix that as we sew. So it's not the end of the world. If your kit comes, or if you cut your scrap fur and it's a little off, that's okay, we can fix it. So I'm going to use a ladder stitch and I'm going to start sewing around kind of the corona of the nose. I hope that's the right word. The edge of the nose. I'm being mindful of the other side of that pin. I just have it in there so my part doesn't creep away from me. So here, see that? So I'm gonna go just outside of my beard and through my nose, and I'm gonna stretch it over there. So this next bit of sewing is going to be a little tricky because I'm going through the beard, the body, and that layer of glue. This needle doesn't want to do it, so I'm going to use a tool to help push that needle through. Rark, there it is. And again, pushing down through the beard, through the body, back up through the beard, into the nose. I'm going to be mindful of my beard threads. Apparently this thing wants to tie itself in a knot. Oh, there we go. I can take my pin out. Down through the beard, through the body, back up through the beard. And again, it's tricky, so I'm going to use this tool to help push that needle through. I'm being careful. Okay, so here again, my beard's a little wider than my nose, so I'm going to go to the outside edge and through out there on the other side. And then I'm going to just take a stitch and pull the nose over that far. Boom. Sorry, I'm getting a little out of frame here, but it was trying to see around the camera. Sewing through a viewfinder is kind of tricky, but there we are. So I think I've sewn the nose all the way down, so I'm going to put in a lock stitch, and I'm going to tie my knot, which I'm put my needle through, take the tail of my thread and wrap it around my needle 3 times. 2, 3. pull it through, squinch it down, and pop my needle through. Tug gently to bury my knot and snip off my little threads. Okay, so I'm gonna pull the beard fibers out of my stitches and trim off some stray beard business here. Kind of comb out my beard, and now I'm ready to shape it because he's a little shaggy. So I'm snipping this like I would be cutting my bangs. I don't want to cut straight across because that would look wrong on Gnome Chompski. So I'm just taking little snips. I'm gonna fluff it up so I can check the shape. You know, take as much time as you think you need here to shape the beard as much as you want to a shape that you like. Fluff them up a little bit, and we're done. Look at that. And I present to you Gnome Chompski. All right, so thank you for joining me in making Gnome Chompski. I hope you had fun. I hope it was informative, and I hope you learned some skills that you can take away with you into your next project. I like working on projects like this because sometimes, you know, bigger projects are a little too thinking. Maybe they're too serious or too precious, and I need something to just kind of shake it off with something with no consequences. And Gnome Chompski was exactly that for me. And I hope it is exactly that for you. And then you've got something that you've made with good intentions and good spirits that you can give to a friend, or replace Elf on the Shelf with Gnome Chompski. Anyway, so again, I hope you had fun. Please like and subscribe and hit the notification bell, and I'll see you next time. Bye.